Well, welcome everybody back to Book Sandwiched In. And this is our second book review of the spring season. And I have more program survey forms for people to fill out. If you have not filled one out, would you please raise your hand and I'll make sure you get one. Thank you. Anybody need a pen?
Yes. Good.
So if we did after.
And please leave them right here on the edge of the table when you leave, right next to the listing of all of the book reviews this spring. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, our reviewer, and it's Owen Frank. And he'll be reviewing the book James by Percival Everett. James won the 2024 National Book Foundation Award for Fiction. Owen Frank is the Branch Supervisor for the Chemung County Library District. He's worked for the Chemung County Libraries since late 1997. And he'll be doing a wonderful review. Thank you, Owen.
Thank you for having me. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Happy you could all make it out to the talk today. Now, by show of hands, how many have read this book?
30.
What page are you on?
30.
30 pages in? Okay, of those of you who have not read the book, how many intend to read the book? And tell the truth.
I don't know.
Okay. So I'm gonna...
They're waiting for you to convince them.
Okay, well I gotta warn you, I'm an old English major, so my approach today is kind of like those papers I had to write back in my youth, so it's not gonna be like a book report, it's gonna be closer to interpretation and whatnot, but I gotta say this is one of the best novels I've read in a long time, but I say that my reading interests of late have been leaning more towards the nonfiction or the more popular fiction, less of the dense reading. But saying dense reading doesn't really describe James because it is very accessible. It's been on the bestseller list for almost a year, and it's one of those rare books that has had tremendous commercial success, but also artistic success, and that doesn't happen too often these days. If you follow what books are on the New York Times bestseller list, it doesn't always happen. But this is one of those rare occasions of late that has happened. So, I'm going to briefly introduce some biographical information about the author, Percival Everett. He was born in Georgia when his father was a sergeant in the Army. Eventually, his father became a dentist in Columbia, South Carolina, and that's where he spent most of his life. You can hear me okay?
A little louder, please.
Little louder, okay. I think it's because I want to have eye contact with everybody that the microphone stays a little stationary. So I'll try to move this like this. Is that better? Okay, great. So where was I? Okay. Grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. He received his bachelor's degree in philosophy from the University of Miami. His master's degree in fiction, Master's of Arts from Brown University. After his academic career, he taught at several colleges, including the University of Kentucky, Notre Dame, University of California at Riverside, and he's currently a professor and former chair of the department. He's the distinguished professor at the University of Southern California, a very prestigious university. He's written several books. Other than James, his other well-known book was published in the early, I believe 2001, was Erasure. It was later adapted to a film called American Fiction, which won the 2023 Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay. I don't know if you've seen that movie. I haven't seen it, and I'm embarrassed to say, especially since it's being recorded, I haven't read it either. But after reading James, I think I want to explore more of his fiction. He's really remarkable as an artist. As was mentioned in the intro, this is an award-winning book on its own. National Book Award, also won the Kirkus Best Fiction Award for 2024. And I did some research in preparing for the talk today, and probably one of the best quotes that I agree with that I found was from the Washington Post. They described Percival Everett as one of the most adventurous experimental modern American novelists, and I would agree with that. He self-describes himself as pathologically ironic. And there is a lot of irony in this. According to my research, the common themes from a lot of his works are satire, exploring race relations, and identity issues, which as those of you who promised to read this book will see, and those that have read the book, I imagine, agree throughout this book. So, a show of hands, how many of you have read Huckleberry? And be honest. Okay, and of those that have read Huckleberry Finn, has it been in the last 5 years?
Last 50 years.
Last 50 years? Last 10 years? Okay, yeah. It's been about 20 years since I've read it. And while I wouldn't consider it a requirement, and I'm sure those that, that have read the book would agree, and shout out if you don't. I don't think it's a requirement to read this book, because I think the book stands on its own. It would certainly enrich your understanding of what Percival Everett's trying to do in this book, because of a different perspective and a different point of view that this story was written in, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Briefly, I don't want to spoil. There's a very important revelation towards the end of the book, and I don't want to spoil it for those that haven't read the book. Excuse me. But basically, a lot of this plot follows the plot of Huckleberry Finn. In the beginning, James overhears or finds out that he's about to be sold. So he runs away and hides on the island on the Mississippi. Huckleberry Finn running away from his abusive father, bumps into Jim on that island, and the adventure, as Huckleberry Finn calls it, begins. Excuse me. And it follows some of and there are introductions of some of the scenes, important scenes from Huckleberry Finn. The King and the Dauphin appear in this, but it's a lot darker than I recall from Huckleberry Finn. It has a lot of, excuse me, a lot to do with perspective. In Huckleberry Finn, it's the perspective of Huckleberry Finn, a boy, a child. So there's that sense of, there's a naivete, there's a sense of wonder, a yearning for adventure. In this book, because it's from Jim's point of view, there's terror, there's incredible fear, there's anger. And while he cares deeply for Huckleberry Finn and wants to ensure his safety as best he can, you almost feel that, you know, he finds it a bit cumbersome for several reasons. Finds it cumbersome to take care and watch out for Huck, because Jim is in a heck of a lot more danger, because he's a runaway, and he knows what's going to happen. Now, the King and the Dauphin appear, and like I had mentioned that, there's still the absurd situations in that, but definitely it got a lot darker. And the Grangerford-Shepherdson feud, while not as prominent as it was in Twain's book, it is mentioned in it, but it's from Jim's point of view, and so there's more concern for his safety because he may be falsely blamed for what happened, you know, the dead bodies, which is fascinating to me. Overall in this book, what struck me, and since you just started it, you've probably already been struck by it, is the language. James the narrator, speaks standard English. He speaks standard English to other people of color in this book, and as do they. The conversations are in standard English. However, excuse me, whenever he's around and conversing with white people, he speaks in the vernacular. He calls it the slave code in this book. And it's a way for safety so that white people don't feel threatened by him. Another excuse me, another important thing to remember when reading this book, or I should say a departure, the character Jim in Huckleberry Finn is described as amiable and maybe gullible, the butt of the jokes, not in a fun way. In this book, he's really on a journey of discovery and perseverance, survival, because as he runs away, he wants to reunite and bring his family to freedom. And he'll stop at nothing to do that. And there are several scenes in this book where, excuse me, where the sacrifices are made on Jim's behalf from fellow people of color, where they, in some cases, give the ultimate sacrifice. Not necessarily for Jim, but to assist Jim in getting his freedom and finding his family. But that I thought was a theme. It's almost like that subgenre of literature, survival literature. We've all read books where characters overcome the horror, and survive and persevere. I don't know what's going on with my voice today, folks. So, what I find very interesting, another thing that's interesting about it is there's a slight shift in the time of this, in the forward of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, it says about 40 or 50 years ago, which would place the events of this novel in the well, it was published in the mid-1880s, so it would have been the 1830s, 40s, perhaps early 50s. But in this book, they mention the shelling of Fort Sumter and that the war has begun. And there is a scene where they see, in hiding, they see a Union soldier. Sorry for the spoilers. But it's interesting to me that the reaction from both Huckleberry Finn thinks about joining the war for the adventure, again, the child, the boy, looking for the adventure, whereas Jim, as I recall, didn't think it made a difference because he was, hyper-focused on his freedom and finding his family. Okay, I'm going to go through my notes here a little bit. And there's a special connection with a concern. In the story, as when they split, they're separated, and Jim is sold by the Dauphin and the King to someone for money, and he's eventually. I gotta find it in my notes here. Okay, he's eventually purchased by a character named Daniel Decatur Emmett, to be the tenor in a minstrel show. And incidentally, Daniel Decatur Emmett was a real person. He was a songwriter, early minstrel performer, and he wrote songs, Dixie being one of them, and The Blue Tail Fly. He's credited with writing those songs. And this is one of the best examples in this book of irony. The irony. Remember, the author is pathologically ironic, and this is the scene where Emmett was from the north. He was born and raised in Mount Vernon, Ohio, and he did not support slavery. And according to some research I did, he was embarrassed and appalled that the South adopted his song Dixie. And in this book, he buys James to be the tenor, so but at the same time he's like, oh, you're not a slave, but he really is. And he does suffer the fear, especially when he's interacting with white people. And I'm going to read a passage in a little bit that describes that, or that illustrates that. And the absurd situation that they get into during his time as performing in the minstrel show. Here is a person of color, dressed up or made up, pretend, the audience assumes he's white, and he's made up in blackface to perform with this minstrel show. So it's the absurd, it's ironic. And yet, behind that are some revelations, and I'm gonna read. Maybe I'll read that passage now. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, wait a minute. Let me back up a second here. Jim's character, as I mentioned earlier, he's developing a strong sense of self. He becomes respected in his mind. He demands respect. And I'm going to read a little passage here early in the book. It's on page 55, so you'll see it real soon. He says, he's writing. This is the first time he's writing, because he learned to read and write by sneaking into Judge Thatcher's office and reading from his library, and he taught himself to read and write. And the first thing he wrote down, he had a writing utensil and some paper. He says, I am called Jim. I have yet to choose a name. In the religious preachings of my white captors, I am a victim of the curse of Ham. The white so-called masters cannot embrace their cruelty and greed, but must look to that lying Dominican friar for religious justification. But I will not let this condition define me. I will not let myself, my mind, drown in fear and outrage. I will be outraged as a matter of course. But my interest is in how these marks that I am scratching on this page could mean anything at all. If they can't have meaning, then life can have meaning. Then I can have meaning. Very powerful. Very powerful. Long cry from the Jim from Huckleberry Finn. Excuse me. The other interesting thing that I found in this is, and this is another example of the irony and hypocrisy and absurdity. While on Jackson Island, James is recovering from a snake bite. He has a hallucinatory dream where he has a conversation with Voltaire. Later, while he's sleeping, he has a dream that he's talking with John Locke. And I just want to read this passage because I think it's a really good example of the confronting hypocrisy of the so-called liberals, just like with Emmett from the minstrel show, the songwriter, just like okay, so here we go. I knew I was dead asleep and dreaming, but I didn't know whether John Locke knew that. I've been thinking about you, I said. I've been pondering hypocrisy. Don't start up with me now, he said. It was a job after I wrote the Constitution for Barbados. The Carolinians asked me to write them one too, and I wrote it. What you're saying is that if someone pays you enough, it's okay to abandon what you have claimed to understand as moral and right. When you put it that way, he said. When I put it that way, what? They wanted a constitution that would justify their behavior. If I hadn't written it for them, someone else would have. What in the world would be different if that had happened? I looked at Tim. You tell me, I said. Some might say that my views on slavery are complex and multifaceted. Convoluted and multifarious? Well-reasoned and complicated. Entangled and problematic? Sophisticated and intricate. Labyrinthine and Dalian. Oh, well played, my friend. And then Huck wakes him up and says, oh, you talk funny. Because remember, Huck hasn't heard standard English from James. And I think that illustrates where Jim is a fully fledged developed character in this book, not a caricature. Maybe caricature is an unfair description, unfair to Mark Twain, but you can see that he's more fully developed, not the butt of jokes, not the unarticulate, not the uneducated. So it just very, very powerful, very powerful. And throughout this book, you can see him developing. And I don't want to go into gory details about some of the terror and the violence he experiences, he witnesses. It's both mental, physical, and sexual. But he overcomes that. His focus is to get back to his family and to get their freedom. And this is a small spoiler alert. Towards the end of the book, he he breaks into Judge Thatcher's home to find out where they were sold. He found out they were sold, but he couldn't find it. And Judge Thatcher comes into his office and confronts him. Let's see. Oh, I guess I'll skip that one, but we'll go right to this. Okay. And in this confrontation, the judge is confronting Jim, and Jim is armed in this encounter, and confronts Jim about the way he was talking, because Judge Thatcher had not heard James's actual voice. And he says, and James reflects, "I had never seen a white man filled with such fear. The remarkable truth, however, was that it was not the pistol, but my language. The fact that I didn't conform to his expectations, that I could read, and that had so disturbed and frightened him." So it wasn't that he had a loaded pistol pointed at him, it was that he spoke as an equal. And you know, that reading that really again brought home the characterization and the development of of James as a character. Far superior, and just the voice that he had. It was strong, it was committed. And okay, one last passage. I didn't mark it, but I think it's important. And I might kind of be giving away an ending, but at the very end of the book, I'm just going to give you the last line. He's asked, "And who are you?" And he says, "I am James." "James what?" "Just James." That's the end. I'm not giving away any of the plot, I promise. Those that have read this book will attest to that. So I highly, highly recommend this book. It's been a long time since I've read fiction written to this quality, thought-provoking, and it's still very accessible. The chapters are very short. I wouldn't call it a page turner, but because of its brevity compared to Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, it gives you time to reflect on that and to think about it. It's like when we all took our English literature classes and we discussed in class about the themes, the characterizations, the allusions, the imagery. It's that, but it's accessible. And I would argue that's probably one of the reasons why it has such a wide audience. And it's one of the few times when reading a work of fiction that I'm not trying to cast in film adaptation. Which I hope someday they do bring this to film, because I think it would be a great way for those less inclined to read books to compare both stories and compare both characterizations of Jim. So,
as long as it's true to the book.
Say again, Lynn?
As long as it's true to the book and not a readapted Hollywood ending, right? Because that could do more damage to the book and the messages of it.
Well,
arguing against an infrastructure that's still very present.
Yes.
We talk about racism today.
Yes.
And what's happening.
And yes, and that reading this book in the soon-to-be mid-21st century, there are a lot of contemporary issues too. And even 20 years ago when I read Huckleberry Finn, just how contemporary it really is. And I would say that for me, the biggest difference between Huckleberry Finn and James, other than the obvious point of view and who's the narrator, is where Huckleberry Finn, they're both satirical, but where Huckleberry Finn being the narrator in, it's a coming of age, to me, it's a coming of age story. Where I think James is more of discovery, and it's not really a coming of age story, but it's a story about empowerment and survival. So, any questions?
Thanks, that was a great presentation.
Well, thank you.
I loved it because a lot of his humor and irony is very similar to Twain. He actually, I think, rewrote and did some play on words of what Twain wrote. But
Yep.
the other thing he did that Twain did is that he uses the N-word. I just wonder what you thought of that, or what people in the audience think of it.
Yeah,
And if
it's
he did, and I would love to sit down and talk to him and say, what went through your mind? How long and how did you decide you were going to do that?
right. Yeah, I struggle with that. It's a horrible word. I've been doing some of the research, trying to wrap my head around the comparison between the two novels. It was written over 250, 260 times, it appears, in Huckleberry Finn, obviously being a shorter book, it's not as long. I often think about controversial or upsetting imagery or language if it contributes to the narrative. Years ago, I did a talk about the Da Vinci Code, and it was controversial, particularly because, as I recall, it was suggested that Mary Magdalene was Jesus Christ's spouse. And in that talk, there were a lot more people. It was rather intimidating, but I got through it. I suggested it contributed to the narrative. And if it contributes to the narrative, while it's upsetting, it's offensive. If it drives the story, drives the plot, deepens the character development, if it contributes to the theme, contributes to the ideas being expressed, then you have to allow it. As offensive, as controversial, and I think it contributes to this book, contributes to its richness.
I agree with you. I think he used it because he wants that book to upset you,
Yeah.
to make you mad, to make you be disgusted.
Yep.
What I really loved about it is he talks about the little things in the life of a slave we never would have thought about. You could get whipped for having
Exactly.
a pencil. You
Yes.
can't be caught reading. You can't be caught laughing around white people.
Yes.
And I just wonder how much of that is fiction or how much of it is truth.
Yes.
It certainly makes you think.
Yes, you really get the sense of the terror, the moment-to-moment terror that anyone enslaved in the United States experienced. I choose to believe that is true. It made sense to me.
I'm sure he had to really wrestle with it. Do I use it or not?
Sure. And I think, again, it contributes to the success of the novel, as appalling as it is. And it's interesting, in his acknowledgments at the end of the book, Percival writes, "Finally, a nod to Mark Twain. His humor and humanity affected me long before I became a writer. Heaven for the climate, hell for my long-awaited lunch with Mark Twain." So, and in some of the interviews that were published upon this book's release, he does acknowledge his debt to Mark Twain. And there certainly isn't an attack on Huckleberry Finn, but it's a retelling. Phyllis, you had a question.
I think if I have written to authors via their publishers, as they usually say in the book, and I've gotten answers back, emails and text messages, and that would be a great question for the
Thank
author.
you. Good idea.
Yeah, But again, I can't recommend this book enough. If you're a Mark Twain fan, it's not, and again, as I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't consider it a requirement to reread Huckleberry Finn. I would think one of the film adaptations would introduce the common elements and scenes from both, from Huckleberry Finn, that could give you a pretty good basis for appreciating what Everett's trying to do in this book. Other than to bear in mind that the difference of the first-person narrative, Huckleberry Finn coming of age, and again, there's more to it, of course, and James more of a survivor. I think it would be interesting. I didn't have time in preparing this. There's other books that have been that are retelling of earlier works. And I think it would be interesting to compare James to some of those other retellings. And I'm thinking more of pop culture, like Maleficent or Wicked. Yeah, that's another example. It might be interesting to approach it from that way, but I just didn't have time.
One of my favorite parts in the book was when James was teaching his kids how to code switch.
Yes, like the talk.
It was like, wow.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of the talk
Exactly,
that contemporary
exactly.
people, parents, and
Usually do about sex, but this was
Well,
about language.
that and for people of color, how to behave if you're pulled over.
Yeah.
And that was what instantly
That was
popped in my mind.
I was hooked
Yeah,
after that part.
yeah, yep, absolutely, absolutely. Any other? Oh, yes, Jim.
I just also love that the author did a wonderful job of showing how Huck comes to realization how little he knows about black people and slaves, and he realizes, wow, he's a human being. He
Yes,
starts realizing, I'm the one who's been making mistakes.
yes.
He weaves that in so nicely.
He does, and you know, I was wondering how he was going to fit something like in, because you know that very important passage towards the end where he decides he's not going to turn Jim in, he's going to protect him and help him gain his freedom. Where he says, "I'll do it." You know, that to me it's the most powerful passage from Huckman, and yeah, I too appreciated that. Geez, if more of you would have read it, we could talk for another hour and I wouldn't have to go back to work. Thanks. Yes, Jim.
I will say, as a person who hadn't read it, you helped me be convinced that I should.
Oh, well, good. I'm glad. You're probably going to have to buy a copy like mine because just about every copy in the Southern Tier Library System is either on hold or checked out right now. You might be able to get a large print edition, but you know it's a little heavier.
Well, I've been working on it.
Okay, well, yeah, you could probably do some curls with the large print edition, but yeah, it's really, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world right now, but to see a book with such literary value have that commercial success, that you know, it gives me a slight bit of optimism for the present. I know it's hard, but I hope you would continue to read this book, and good. I am pleased to hear that, and
Is the book featured as Book of the Year or something at Barnes &
Yeah.
I believe so. Yeah.
Big poster about it.
Yeah, when I bought my copy there, yeah, I should have, you know, if I was thinking ahead, I would have borrowed the large print edition, but I you know, being a librarian, I kind of wanted to be in the hands of the patrons, not necessarily, it's kind of selfish.
Well, there are also books that are worth having on your shelf forever.
Yeah, Yeah, and my descendants can, donate to the library for the book sale.
Would you have any comments about the option of listening to it as opposed to reading it?
Well, I think it would be interesting. I don't know who the narrator is of the audiobook version, but I actually listened to Huckleberry Finn while I followed along 120 years ago, because it was an enriching experience, because sometimes it was hard to for me at that time to visualize what the exact pronunciation of some of the dialects from that book, and I think that could in some ways enrich the experience.
But not substitute for it. Both together is really what you're saying.
Oh, I wouldn't think so.
Okay.
I personally, when I listen to an audiobook, it's to help me fall asleep, like a bedtime story when I was a kid. So I personally don't have the focus to really read that or consume the content that way. But I think if it's something that you're already doing, if you tend to listen to audiobooks, I think it would be interesting, because the narrator's really interpreting these words, and how they enunciate words, and how they interject emotion. There's certain audiobooks that I won't listen to just because the narrator isn't pleasing to my ear. Where others, I've listened to some really cheesy books, but the narrator's voice was either, because my main motivation is sleep, had a nice soothing voice, or I'm a sucker for accents, that the accent in a way kind of contributed to not only the appreciation of the content, but enriched the content. Which I think that's an excellent question. But yeah, I'd say go for it. Hopefully the narrator interprets and interjects a little bit of themselves in their performance. But I like to follow along when I'm earnest about a book. I do like to follow along to them reading, but I wouldn't say it's necessary.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any more questions?
You'll have to go back
Oh, okay.
and we'll review what you all read.
Okay. Well, I again strongly encourage it. You may have to buy it or just be patient. Borrow it from your friend. Yeah. There you go. If you have a birthday upcoming, maybe make that as a suggestion. And I agree, it's certainly worth having in your personal collection, and you can always donate it to the Friends group. It'll probably be purchased within the hour of it being put out on the shelf. Yes. All right, any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.